Hello, space travelers. Welcome to the channel where people create stories about the universe. Get ready for a new adventure.
By that point, the war had stopped feeling like a story about battles and started looking more like a spreadsheet. Entire regions of space had already fallen under the control of the Krovath Imperium. Their war machines advanced from one star system to the next with cold industrial patience, dismantling orbital defenses, installing obedience governors, and draining each world's resources to fuel whatever conquest came next. Above the ruined planet of Etris, coalition strategists gathered inside the Hall of Concordance, where they reviewed the same grim numbers every single cycle. They calculated the fleet strength needed to challenge the Imperium in the Talvern Reach, 3,000 capital ships minimum. They projected troop requirements for reclaiming occupied worlds, 12 billion soldiers drawn from 6 different species. Expected casualty rate, 42%. The Imperium didn't actually fear resistance. What they feared was delay. Their entire doctrine was brutally straightforward. Overwhelm the enemy, occupy the territory, extract everything of value. The coalition strategy, on the other hand, was far less graceful. Their goal was simply to survive long enough to make the Imperium bleed until negotiation became unavoidable. The moment Earth's name appeared on the chamber agenda, though, the mood in the room noticeably changed. Humans had only joined the coalition 8 cycles earlier. Their fleets weren't the biggest anyone had seen, and their weapons certainly weren't considered the most advanced. Compared to the vast territories controlled by older civilizations, human space was relatively small. Still, every engagement involving humans had ended the same way. Precise strikes that caused damage wildly out of proportion to their size. They never attacked where anyone expected them to. High Strategist Zarek, a representative of the tall species, activated a projection of the Sol system. Earth has confirmed its willingness to enter full mobilization, Zarek announced. We now await confirmation regarding fleet tonnage and troop deployment. A Vrock observer pulsed in agreement, its body glowing faintly. Based on industrial output, Earth could likely contribute 4 carrier groups along with planetary ground divisions. Then the chamber doors opened. Only one human walked inside. He wore a dark uniform with no decorations except for a small silver insignia positioned over his left chest. His posture was upright but relaxed, confident without being stiff. He carried no data slates and arrived without assistance. "My name is General Marcus Hale," he said simply. Zarek tilted his long head slightly. "General Hale, we require confirmation of Earth's mobilization schedule." Hale gave a single nod. "Earth will deploy 1 asset." The entire chamber went silent. Zarek waited, assuming more explanation would follow. None came. "1 asset," Zarek repeated carefully. "Please clarify fleet designation." "No fleet," Hale replied. The glow of the Vrock observer dimmed slightly. "You are referring to a special operations unit?" "1 human." Silence spread through the hall like pressure in deep water. Zarek processed the translation twice before responding. "1 biological soldier?" he asked. "Yes." Murmurs moved through the assembled strategists. "Is this intended as symbolic support?" one delegate asked. Hale's expression remained unchanged. "No." "Then, is this reconnaissance ahead of full mobilization?" "No." Zarek leaned forward slightly. "The Imperium currently controls 17 systems within the Talvern Reach. Their garrisons number in the billions, and orbital batteries surround every critical world. The coalition requires massed fleets. Hale met his gaze evenly. What you require is the Imperium's command structure broken. That requires fleets, Zarek insisted. No, Hale said calmly. It requires one man. The statement was recorded without alteration. Outside the hall, coalition analysts argued endlessly. Some believed Earth had completely misunderstood the scale of the war. Others interpreted the decision as arrogance or even a diplomatic insult. A small minority considered another possibility. Maybe Earth understood something no one else did. 3 cycles later, a small unmarked human vessel entered coalition space. It transmitted no fleet identification codes. It traveled alone, without escort. The ship docked at Forward Command Station Kestrel, and only one passenger stepped out. His name was Captain Ethan Ward. He carried a single-sealed container and wore standard field armor with no decorations or modifications. His physique was average, nothing remarkable at first glance. There were no visible augmentations suggesting anything extraordinary about him. From an upper gallery, Zarek watched his arrival. "This is the asset?" he asked. General Hale stood beside him. "Yes?" Zarek studied Ward carefully. "He appears ordinary." "He is," Hale answered. Ward was escorted into a secure briefing chamber where a rotating projection displayed the Imperium's control structure across the Talvin Reach. At the center stood Command Nexus Ardent, an artificial station positioned at the gravitational intersection of 3 occupied systems. Ardent coordinated fleet deployments, managed planetary resource extraction, and enforced security protocols across the entire region. Destroying it would require penetrating multiple defensive layers while surviving rapid response fleets. Coalition simulations labeled such an operation infeasible without catastrophic casualties. Ward watched the projection without any visible reaction. "Entry points?" he said. Zarek blinked. "There are none." Ward reached out and tapped the hologram where several supply conduits converged. "There are always entry points." Hale clasped his hands behind his back. "Captain Ward will operate independently." "No fleet maneuvers?" Zarek asked sharply. "No diversionary attacks?" "No." Zarek's voice lowered. "If he fails, the Imperium will tighten its control." Hale nodded once. "If we mobilize fleets, they will expect us." "And one human, they will not," Zarek said slowly. Ward prepared in silence. He studied Imperium schematics, analyzed patrol timing, and tracked energy fluctuations across the Nexus surface. The container he carried did not hold some impossible superweapon. Inside were breaching charges, signal disruptors, a compact propulsion rig, and a rifle with limited ammunition. Finite tools for an impossible mission. On the day of departure, Hale met Ward alone in the docking bay. "No support," Hale said. "I know." "No guaranteed extraction." "I know." Hale studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded. The conversation ended there. Ward boarded a small vessel that carried him to the outer boundary of the Talvin Reach. From that point forward, he transferred into a single-person insertion pod equipped with minimal signature shielding. For 6 hours, the pod drifted silently toward the East U.S. minor debris belt near Ardent. Imperium sensors continuously scanned for incoming fleets or large incursions. They never noticed a single cold object drifting through space, one no larger than ordinary cargo. I detached from the insertion pod and activated my propulsion rig, guiding myself through the drifting debris with short, controlled bursts. Ahead of me, Ardent filled the darkness, massive, angular, and impossibly precise, its surface covered in weapon batteries and shield emitters. Inside that structure lived and worked billions of Imperium personnel. This war was supposed to be fought with armies. I carried enough ammunition for maybe a dozen fights if I was careful. Timing mattered more than firepower. I latched onto an external maintenance conduit during a shield fluctuation cycle I had mapped earlier during mission prep. The fluctuation window lasted 3 seconds. I only needed 2. My breaching charge detonated inward, tight and controlled, opening a clean entry point without damaging surrounding systems. Inside Ardent, alarms immediately came alive. Security units deployed along the infiltration routes they expected an attacker to use. I didn't take those routes. Instead, I crawled through maintenance shafts, barely wide enough for my body, navigating entirely from memory and long hours of pre-mission study. The first Imperium soldiers met me at Junction 8. They were larger than humans. Their armor fused directly into rigid plating supported by energy shields. I fired twice. Both of them dropped before they fully understood where the attack had come from. I wasn't pushing forward aggressively. I was moving with purpose. My mission wasn't about killing enemies. It was about reaching access. Ardent's command core sat deep inside a fortified central column protected by multiple redundant control systems. Destroying those outer layers would have triggered an immediate lockdown. So I didn't destroy them. I bypassed them. Along the way, I planted signal disruptors across major communication trunks, not to shut them down completely, but to introduce delay, distortion, and confusion. Inside Ardent, time itself started to feel uncertain. Orders traveled slower. Security teams received conflicting positional updates. Back in the Hall of Concordance, Coalition sensors detected irregularities forming within Ardent's command traffic. Kryn leaned toward General Hale. "Is this his doing?" Hale watched silently before answering. "Yes." Inside the station, I reached the primary data relay chamber. I didn't attack it. Instead, I connected a compact device to a physical interface port and released a custom algorithm into the Imperium command network. The program wasn't designed to crash systems. It quietly altered targeting priorities and adjusted fleet coordination weighting. Across the Talvern Reach, Imperium fleets began receiving instructions that were just slightly wrong. Patrol routes overlapped inefficiently. Response delays increased by seconds. And in war, seconds could decide everything. Security forces closed in around me. I fought them in narrow corridors where their superior numbers worked against them. My rifle ran dry. I switched to my sidearm. When that emptied, I turned breaching charges into directional explosives, collapsing corridors behind me to slow pursuit. A plasma blast grazed my left shoulder, burning through armor. I didn't slow down. Pain was just information. I kept moving toward the command core. The chamber itself was enormous, filled with holographic tactical displays and Imperium officers directing operations across entire sectors. None of them expected a single human to appear at the entrance. I didn't open fire. Instead, I ran straight toward the central control column while incoming shots struck around me. My propulsion rig projected a temporary barrier that held just long enough. At the base of the column, I secured the final device from my container. It wasn't an explosive, it was a cascade initiator. When activated, it wouldn't destroy Ardent. It would force the system into emergency isolation mode, severing direct command links to preserve internal stability. I triggered it. Alarms escalated instantly. Across the Talvin Reach, Imperium fleets lost synchronized coordination. Without Ardent guiding them, planetary garrisons defaulted to defensive protocols. Coalition observers noticed the shift immediately. Zarek stared at the incoming data. Imperium fleet cohesion reduced by 30%. Hale nodded. Signal Coalition commanders. Advance. I fought my way back toward an exterior maintenance sector as compartment after compartment sealed behind me in cascading lockdown. No extraction team waited. I had calculated that isolation protocols would cause temporary power fluctuations along the outer hull. I reached my original breach just as emergency fields cycled offline. Then I launched myself into vacuum seconds before internal bulkheads sealed shut behind me. Coalition long-range sensors soon detected a single human life signal drifting in Ardent's shadow. Far away, a stealth retrieval craft, positioned silently at extreme range the entire time, adjusted course. It hadn't been support, it had been contingency. Across the Talvin Reach, Imperium command structures fractured. Coalition fleets pushed into systems that had once operated under flawless coordination. Without centralized control, Imperium forces fought independently. They were still powerful, but they were no longer unified. Inside the Hall of Concordance, silence settled as real-time battle reports streamed across displays. Zarek slowly turned toward Hale. "You sent one human." Hale inclined his head slightly. "Yes." "And the Imperium command network collapses." "For now," Hale replied. Aboard the retrieval craft, a medic secured me into a stabilization frame. My armor was scorched, but my breathing remained steady. Above me, a tactical display showed shifting battle lines. Imperium fleets were already retreating from 3 outer systems. I closed my eyes for a moment. The war had demanded armies. Earth had chosen simplicity instead. But the campaign wasn't finished yet. Ardent didn't explode. It dimmed. Throughout the Talvin Reach, Imperium commanders stared at tactical displays that no longer moved in perfect synchronization. Fleet maneuvers lagged behind reality. Reinforcement routes conflicted with one another. Planetary garrisons received outdated sector maps. The Krovath Imperium had built its dominance on flawless, centralized control. Ardent wasn't just a station. It was the mind of their occupation, and now that mind was isolated, locked inside containment protocols triggered by Captain Ethan Ward. At Forward Command Station Kestrel, Coalition strategists watched systems once labeled impenetrable begin to fracture under their own operational weight. High Strategist Zarek stood beside General Marcus Hale in the main observatory. "Imperium units are reverting to autonomous command," Zarek said. Their doctrine depended on centralized authority, and without it, local commanders hesitated. Hale gave a small nod. They were never trained to act without supervision. Coalition fleets immediately began pushing into systems that had long been suppressed. With Ardent no longer coordinating operations, Imperium squadrons reacted unevenly across the region. Some units fought with stubborn discipline. Others pulled back, waiting for orders that never arrived. On Talvin III, a world that had endured occupation for 2 full cycles, Imperium orbital batteries temporarily powered down during command recalibration. Coalition cruisers seized the opportunity, deploying ground forces that secured vital infrastructure before organized resistance could form. Reports poured in from across the Reach. Garrisons requested updated directives that never came. Supply convoys stalled mid-transit. Command relays transmitted conflicting authentication codes that no longer aligned. Zarek watched the pattern emerge with growing realization. "One disruption," he said quietly, "and the entire structure destabilizes." Hale remained expressionless. "We didn't destroy their army," he said calmly. "We removed its spine." Inside a secured medical bay aboard the retrieval craft Resolute Dawn, I sat upright despite repeated medical instructions telling me to stay reclined. A stabilization patch sealed the plasma burn along my shoulder, and my vitals remained steady. A naval officer stepped inside. "Imperium fleet cohesion has dropped by 40%, she reported. "Coalition forces have already reclaimed 2 systems." I listened without reacting. "And Ardent?" I asked. "Still isolated? Internal power cycles remain unstable." I nodded once. The mission had never depended on overwhelming destruction. It depended on understanding how the Imperium thought. They valued centralized clarity above everything else. What they truly feared was fragmentation. And fragmentation was exactly what I had given them. Back in the Talvern Reach, Imperium High Commander Thalrex established an emergency command node aboard his flagship, Sovereign Spear. He attempted to restore authority over the scattered fleets. Transmission delays and authentication failures slowed every effort. Worse still, Coalition forces began targeting secondary communication relays that Ardent had once protected. Without its oversight, those relays were vulnerable. Thalrex ordered concentrated counterattacks to reclaim outer systems. But Coalition commanders anticipated reactive offensives before they even began. General Hale issued a single directive across Allied fleets: do not chase victories, consolidate them. Coalition ships held disciplined positions instead of overextending. Reclaimed territories were fortified, forcing Imperium counterattacks to strike prepared defenses rather than scattered pursuers. On Talvern III, Imperium shock troops attempted a planetary landing to re-establish dominance. Coalition ground units held defensive lines supported by orbital artillery. The assaults were fierce, but poorly synchronized. Reinforcements arrived minutes too late. Supply drops landed far from where they were needed most. Slowly, the nature of the war changed. The Imperium was no longer occupying worlds. It was bleeding against resistance. Zarek observed the cascading consequences with careful amazement during a strategy session. "Your operative did not destroy Ardent," he said to Hale. "He changed how it behaves." Hale inclined his head slightly. "He forced it to protect itself." Ardent's isolation protocols sealed the station against external override to prevent internal sabotage. In doing so, it unintentionally severed its own command connections. The Imperium had built defenses against massive assaults. They had never planned for precise internal disruption. After stabilization, I was transferred back to Earth. There were no public celebrations waiting for me, no ceremonies. My debrief took place in a quiet facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. Hale sat across the table. "The Imperium is attempting decentralized command," he said. "They'll adapt," I answered. "Yes," Hale agreed. "Which means we continue applying pressure." He nodded once. Decision already made. The Coalition launched coordinated strikes against remaining Imperium logistics hubs, now operating without unified scheduling. Human advisors embedded within Allied fleets ensured attacks exploited timing gaps instead of direct strength. On the industrial world of Carthus Vale, Imperium shipyards struggled to assemble replacement vessels. Ardent's scheduling algorithms had once optimized material delivery perfectly. Now, shipments arrived incomplete or late. Coalition raiders intercepted supply convoys with increasing success. Imperium casualties soon exceeded their replacement capacity. High Commander Xiron convened a war council aboard Sovereign Spear. Holographic projections flickered unevenly as unstable communication links struggled to maintain connection. "Our forces remain numerically superior in several sectors," one officer insisted. "But uncoordinated," Xiron replied. "We strike without cohesion." Reports also showed rising unrest among occupied populations. Resistance cells that once acted independently now received synchronized support from advancing coalition forces. The Imperium had expected to crush rebellion through overwhelming centralized force. Instead, it faced thousands of localized uprisings it could no longer manage at the same time. At Forward Command Station Kestrel, Zarek addressed the full coalition assembly. "The Imperium's expansion has halted," he announced. "Their counteroffensives continue to diminish." He turned toward Hale. "This war required armies." Hale answered plainly. "Armies break bodies." He paused briefly. "We broke their system." Over the following cycles, coalition fleets advanced carefully, system by system, not through reckless charges, but through disciplined exploitation of Imperium disorganization. Where Ardent once enabled perfect precision, confusion now ruled. Imperium commanders began withdrawing from outer territories, consolidating forces around core worlds. Each retreat surrendered resources and strategic depth to the coalition. Losses still occurred, but at steadily declining rates. The psychological shift proved just as important as the tactical one. Species that once calculated acceptable devastation now began calculating probable victory. As coalition forces approached the final Imperium stronghold within the Reach, Zarek requested a private meeting with Hale. "You understood something we did not," Zarek said. Hale considered his answer carefully. Hale finally answered Zarek's question. "You were looking at the war like it was a problem of mass," he said calmly. "We looked at it as a problem of control." Zarek's eyes narrowed slightly as he considered that. "You believed the conflict could be simplified?" he asked. "Yes." "And if Captain Ward had failed?" Hale held his gaze without hesitation. "Then we would have sent another." Zarek let the words settle in. What he heard wasn't arrogance, and it wasn't recklessness either. It was persistence. Deep within Imperium core territory, internal debates grew increasingly heated. Resource shortages began to strain logistics, and peripheral governors started questioning why expansion continued when consolidation itself was already failing. Eventually, High Commander Xiron opened a secure communication channel to coalition leadership. His message was direct. "Cease hostilities. We request negotiations for territorial settlement and acknowledge Imperium withdrawal from the Talvern Reach." Back in the Hall of Concordance, the same chamber where Earth's decision had once been doubted, coalition leaders assembled again. Before the session officially began, Zarek spoke quietly to Hale. "They are requesting a negotiated retreat." "Yes," Hale replied evenly. They did not expect this outcome. "No," Hale said. The Imperium delegation appeared as a projection at the center of the chamber. Xiron spoke first. "We acknowledge operational disruption beyond acceptable thresholds. Continued conflict now provides diminishing strategic value." Hale answered without pride or celebration. "Withdraw from all occupied systems within the Reach. Dismantle Ardent's command authority. Recognize coalition sovereignty." Xiron's armored expression remained unreadable. "You commit no fleets to enforce these terms?" Hale's voice stayed steady. "If you violate the agreement, fleets will not be our first response." For a moment, understanding flickered in Xiron's eyes. Negotiations concluded within 2 cycles. Imperium forces began an organized evacuation of the Talvern Reach. Under coalition supervision, Ardent's central core was dismantled and its command infrastructure permanently disabled. Occupied worlds regained independence. Coalition fleets maintained defensive positions, but did not pursue retreating Imperium forces into their core territories. The war that had once demanded billions of soldiers ended not with a massive fleet battle, but with the collapse of a system. Back on Earth, I returned to active duty quietly. There were no ceremonies waiting for me. My name appeared only in internal commendations, never in public broadcasts. In a small office overlooking a training complex, General Hale met me one last time. "The Reach is secure," he said. "For now," I answered. Hale watched new recruits moving through drills below us. "They'll remember this," he said. I adjusted the brace supporting my healing shoulder. "They'll adapt." Hale nodded once. "So will we." Across the galaxy, military academies began studying the Talvern campaign in detail. Analysts who once focused only on fleet numbers and acceptable casualty projections started modeling systemic vulnerabilities instead. The lesson spread quietly, written into doctrine manuals and discussed in strategy chambers. The war had required armies. Earth had sent one human, not because we underestimated the scale of the conflict, but because we identified the fulcrum holding everything together. And when pressure was applied at that single point, the weight of an empire shifted. Coalition worlds rebuilt their futures. Imperium fleets withdrew beyond former borders. The Talvern Reach stood free again. In the end, victory wasn't decided by the size of an army. It came from clarity of purpose. One man moving alone through steel corridors, reducing a war others believed required billions into something solvable. And from that moment forward, the galaxy measured power differently.